Once upon a time, there was a couple named Bright and Sandra. After they got married, they faced challenges in conceiving a child for several years. It took 5 long years of tears and prayers before they were blessed with their daughter Naomi. When Naomi was born, they couldn't stop expressing their gratitude to God for giving them a child when they had almost given up hope. One beautiful evening, after having dinner and retiring to bed, Naomi lay between her parents. Mr. Bright couldn't stop smiling as he watched his little girl. "What's behind that smile tonight?" Sandra asked her husband, smiling along with him. "Who would have thought we'd become parents one day? Do you remember all we went through?" Mr. Bright asked. "How could I forget? I was labelled barren, mocked for 5 years. Friends gave me all sorts of advice. Older women tried offering solutions. Doctors had different diagnoses every time we visited. People pointed at me in the streets, and even women in church mocked me. I was called the fair barren woman. At one point, I almost committed suicide after a woman told me I was a man, and that's why I couldn't give my husband children," Sandra recounted, tears streaming down her face. "It's all in the past now. God has blessed us with Naomi, a bundle of joy," Mr. Bright said, smiling. "Her 7th birthday is next week. Our daughter will be 7 years old," Sandra said with a smile. They continued watching Naomi sleep peacefully. Mr. Bright then turned off the light and bid his wife good night. The next day, Mr. Bright was so busy at work that he forgot to pick Naomi up from school. It was the weekend, and he usually picked her up on weekends. When it was 40 minutes past dismissal time, and Mr. Bright had not yet returned with Naomi, Sandra started to worry. After waiting a bit longer, she called her husband, who was shocked to realize how much time had passed. He asked Sandra to go and get Naomi because he was still tied up at work. Sandra immediately left for Naomi's school. She was already 55 minutes late, and it took another 15 minutes to get there. She took a bus, but got stuck in traffic after a 5-minute drive. Deciding that a bike would be faster, she got off the bus to find one. However, she realized she had left her purse on the bus. Torn between continuing to the school or retrieving her purse, she decided to get her phone from the bus. She walked back quickly to find the bus. Meanwhile, at the school, Naomi waited outside with some classmates for their parents. As parents arrived, Naomi sat alone, wondering if her father had forgotten her. "Naomi, is your father not coming today?" a classmate asked as she left with her mother. Naomi, hungry and tired, decided to walk home alone, carrying her bag and lunchbox. After a few minutes, her lunchbox fell into the road. As she went to retrieve it, a speeding car hit her. The driver, seeing Naomi bleeding and nearly lifeless, quickly took her into his car and drove to the hospital. Back at the bus stop, Sandra saw bus drivers turning around due to traffic. Realizing she might have lost her purse, she decided to walk to the school and call her husband from a teacher's phone. Arriving at the school gate, she saw the headmistress locking up. "Good afternoon, ma'am," Sandra greeted, forcing a smile. "Good afternoon. Why are you so late and sweating?" the headmistress asked. "I'm sorry I'm late. Has everyone left?" Sandra asked, looking around. "Yes, it's 4 p.m. and everyone has left. It's Friday, so we close early," the headmistress replied. "What about my daughter?" Sandra asked, concerned. "No one is here. Why not call your husband?" the headmistress suggested. "I can't. I left my phone in the bus," Sandra explained. The headmistress handed her phone to Sandra, who called Bright. He picked up immediately, and Sandra asked if he had taken Naomi. Realizing Naomi was missing, Mr. Bright said he was coming immediately. Sandra's tears began to flow as she waited. The headmistress called the teacher in charge of Naomi's class, asking her to return to the school. Sandra, anxious and tearful, waited restlessly. When the teacher arrived, she explained that she thought Naomi's father had picked her up. Sandra asked the teacher to call Anita's mother, Naomi's friend. Just then, Mr. Bright arrived. A call came into the headmistress's phone. "I think one of your students was in an accident," the caller said. The description matched Naomi. The headmistress, unsure how to tell the couple, watched as Mr. Bright consoled a crying Sandra. Earlier, David had knocked down Naomi while distracted on the phone. He rushed her to a hospital, praying she would survive. The doctor found she needed surgery for internal brain bleeding. With no equipment available, David decided to take her to his city. After getting approval and instructions from the doctor, David drove Naomi to another hospital. At Naomi's school, the headmistress informed Mr. Bright and Sandra about the accident. Sandra ran to the accident scene, followed by Mr. Bright. Learning that Naomi had been taken to a hospital, they headed to the nearest one. After checking multiple hospitals, they found one where Naomi had been admitted. The doctor explained her condition and that she had been taken to another city for surgery. Sandra fainted from the shock. After she revived, she cried bitterly, asking for her child. "Why me? Why Naomi? After 5 years, God? After 5 years, you sent Naomi to me. Why this huge temptation? Where is my Naomi? Where is my Naomi?" Sandra kept saying in tears loudly. Mr. Bright tried to hold himself. His charming princess was on the verge of death, and no one even knew where she was. He held his wife and tried consoling her. Sandra refused to go home. She wanted her daughter to be brought back to her. The headmistress and the teacher couldn't go home either. They just looked at the couple, who were in pain and couldn't help keeping their tears back in. It was getting dark already, and they needed to go back home. Mr. Bright convinced Sandra to follow him back home. The headmistress begged Mr. Bright not to take out his anger on their school, as they would put their hands together in looking for Naomi. Mr. Bright wasn't in the mood to start creating havoc. He just wanted to take his wife home because she had not been herself. Going after the school was not going to bring back his daughter. He solely blamed himself and hoped the man brings back his daughter alive to them. Back to Mr. David, he was speeding a lot. When he was stopped by the police, he showed them the report written by the doctor, coupled with the notes, and they let him pass. He drove for hours and finally got to his city. It was already dark, but he drove straight to the hospital. He gave them the notes the doctors had given him. Naomi was quickly taken into the theatre while Mr. David made the necessary payments. The surgeon was called, and luckily he was still in the hospital. He'd wanted to leave a while ago, but it was as if something kept him back. He immediately went in to see Naomi. Mr. David was in the waiting room. He was praying and hoping Naomi would come out safe. He kept pacing around and rubbing his hand on his head. His phone kept vibrating in his pocket. He brought it out, and it was his wife, Tina, calling. She had called him so many times, and he never picked up. He picked up the call, and his wife asked him why he wasn't back home yet, after telling her hours ago that he was on his way home. Mr. David explained everything to his wife. She asked where he was so she would come immediately. It took a few minutes, and then Tina arrived at the hospital. She went and met her husband, where he was seated and sweating. She asked him how it all happened, and he told her. Tina was concerned. She decided to wait with her husband for the outcome of the ongoing surgery. The surgery took a very long time. Once in a while, a nurse would come out and then go back into the theatre. Mr. David and Tina kept sleeping and waking up at intervals in the hospital waiting room. They earnestly wanted Naomi to be healed. Time was crawling, but finally, the doctor came out. He was wearing a smile on his face. Mr. David was the first to see the doctor. He tried standing up, and Tina, who was sitting beside him, woke up too. "Doctor, how is she? I hope the surgery was successful," Mr. David asked the doctor anxiously. "By the grace of God and not us, the little girl is safe and out of danger." "Yes, the surgery was successful," the doctor said. "Yes, oh thank God," Mr. David said out loud while his wife hugged him happily. "Please bring down your voices," the doctor said in a low tone. Okay, Mr. David said. "She needs a lot of resting time. She's likely to lose a part of her memory, which will only come back with the time by God's grace. Also, she may not be able to talk well for a while. I have given a list of drugs to the nurse. You get them and make sure she takes them as prescribed. She really needs a lot of love and care from you both to get well soon, the doctor explained. Can we see her now? Tina asked softly. Sure, but she needs no disturbance. She needs maximum rest, the doctor said and walked out. The couple thanked the doctor and walked into the hospital room immediately. Tina walked into the room and set her eyes on Naomi. Streams of tears ran down her cheeks. She started sobbing bitterly while Mr. David tried to console her. The headmistress left with a heavy heart. She knew Naomi was the only daughter of Mr. Bright. She knew what it felt like for a child to be missing. She blamed the teacher in charge for being so careless. The class teacher wanted to defend herself, but she knew that nothing she would say would justify the fact that Naomi got missing under her watch. She only prayed and hoped for Naomi to be safe wherever she was. Mr. Bright stopped a taxi which would take him and his wife back home. He kept consoling her as they drove back home together. When they got home, Mr. Bright began to make calls, creating awareness that his daughter was missing. He wanted to go to the police station, but he couldn't leave his wife alone in the condition she was in. Sandra sat on the chair in the living room, feeling so weak. It felt as if she had just lost a part of herself. She wondered why such a heavy temptation would come to her. She couldn't blame her husband. She knew it wasn't intentional on his side. But she wondered why, of all days, it should be the same day that traffic would hold her up. If only there was no traffic, she might have gotten to school before Naomi met with the accident. Sandra stood up slowly, then walked towards her room in slow steps after wiping her tears. "Where are you going to, Sandy?" Mr. Bright asked, looking at his wife. Sandra just shook her head from left to right and kept walking towards her room. She entered her room and knelt down beside her bed. "Father, I know you won't let anything happen to the only child you've given me. I know you will heal her, even though she's not here with me. Whatever hospital she has been taken to, let her be healed because I trust in you, Lord. In the name of Jesus, amen," Sandra prayed. Mr. Bright responded loudly, "Amen." Sandra turned and looked at him. He had followed her into the room. Mr. Bright consoled his wife. They had no appetite for food. He took his wife to the bathroom and helped her take a shower. After they were done, they retired to bed. Both Mr. Bright and Sandra couldn't find sleep as lots of questions kept running through their minds. Who had taken Naomi? Why did he leave for another city with Naomi without their consent? Was Naomi really safe out there? How would they get to see their only daughter again? Tina started sobbing bitterly as she saw the condition of Naomi. Mr. David held his wife and took her out of the room. The doctor had warned them not to disturb Naomi to avoid any complications. Years ago, when Mr. David got married to Tina, Tina got pregnant for the first time. The couple was so happy for their incoming child. It took only a few weeks, and Tina had a miscarriage. She cried because she couldn't tell what actually caused the miscarriage. She took in again. This time she tried being careful and avoided everything the doctor told her to avoid. Finally, she gave birth to a baby boy. Mr. David and Tina were so happy. They called their little boy Pascal. After the birth of Pascal, the doctor came with the sad news that Tina wouldn't be able to take in anymore due to some complications she had. Mr. David and Tina were not that worried because they had gotten their bundle of joy and they never wanted many children in the first place. Pascal grew into a very smart child. He was admired by many because of how intelligent he was. He became his parents' pride. As time rolled by, Pascal fell sick. He was taken to the hospital for treatment, and after some treatment, he got better. After a few weeks, he got sick again. He was once again taken to the same hospital, and he got better. It suddenly became a habit for Pascal to fall sick after every week. It didn't disturb Mr. David and Tina that much because they had money to buy drugs for their son. Pascal then began to lose weight, and his sickness became so serious. That was when Tina suggested that they change to another hospital. Mr. David agreed. and Pascal was taken to another hospital. When they got to the hospital, a doctor was called because of how serious Pascal's case was. After much checkup with the doctor, he called the couple into his office, leaving Pascal lying on the hospital bed. The doctor told David and Tina that their son had leukemia, blood cancer. He told them that leukemia was controllable and treatable in children, but Pascal's case had reached its peak and he could die at any moment. He advised Mr. David and his wife to go and spend their last moments with their son. Tina cried her eyes out in the doctor's office. Then she went with David to see their son. When they arrived, Pascal was just staring at his parents with his eyes partly opened. The couple tried their best to hide their tears. Pascal smiled at his mother while holding her tight. Suddenly, Tina could feel Pascal's grip loosening. She looked at her son and realized that Pascal was gone. She shook him vigorously, trying to wake him up, but he was really gone. Mr. David stood looking at his son, and tears ran down his cheeks. Tina hugged Pascal, crying her eyes out. Looking at Naomi lying down with bandages made Tina remember how her son had given up the ghost on a hospital bed while smiling at her. Who knows if she's the only one her parents have, just like us? How would they cope without their daughter? Tina asked her husband in tears. Tomorrow morning I'll go back and look for her parents using the name on the school uniform, Mr. David said, still consoling his wife. The next morning, Mr. Bright woke up. He sat on his bed thinking of how he was going to find his only daughter. He decided he was going to go to the police station and lay a complaint about his missing daughter. A call came through his phone. It was from the proprietress of the school. She was calling to plead for forgiveness and assure him that the school was going to help and make sure Naomi was brought back to him. Mr. Bright knew that those words only came because she was afraid of losing her school. He only wanted his daughter to be found and nothing more. So he left for the police station to lay a complaint about his missing daughter. The police assured Mr. Bright that they would try their best to bring his daughter back to him. By the time Mr. Bright came back from the police station, he wanted to go to work. But on second thought, he decided to go back home and be with his wife. He got back home and discovered that the door was open. He had asked Sandra to shut the door behind him. Mr. Bright opened the door slowly to know why the door was still left open. Back at the hospital, Mr. David went back to where Naomi was lying with his wife, Tina. She hadn't moved ever since the surgery was done. She lay still with the white clothes she was changed into, and the bandage on her head had a slight stain of blood. The couple just sat on an empty bed opposite where Naomi lay. "She's so beautiful and adorable," Tina said, hugging her husband as they stared at Naomi. "Yes, she is. Her parents must be lucky to have her. Thank God the operation was successful," Mr. David said with a smile. He looked at his watch and the time said 2 minutes past 1 a.m. "I think you need to go back home and rest, my dear. You have to be at work early, remember?" Mr. David said to his wife. Tina tapped her phone and saw that it was early morning already. She told her husband that she wouldn't be able to find sleep if she went back to the house. Mr. David tried persuading his wife, but she wanted to stay with him and Naomi. He felt the way Tina just kept staring at Naomi with so much love. As time went by, Tina slept off on her husband's lap while Mr. David leaned on the wall, sitting on the bed. The reflection of the early morning sun found its way into the room where Mr. David and his wife were. Noises of people moving around inside the hospital woke Mr. David and Tina up. They were tired. The first thing they did was check on Naomi. She was still sleeping and had not yet opened her eyes. Mr. David left the room and went to get the nurse who was attending to Naomi. He asked for the uniform that Naomi was putting on earlier before they had her clothes changed. The nurse gave the uniform to Mr. David. He went outside and placed the uniform perfectly at the back of his seat. After staring at Naomi for a while, Tina left the hospital room. She was already running late for work. She left Mr. David in the hospital and went to their house. Mr. David gave the nurse some money and asked her to look after Naomi. Then he left the hospital and went towards his car. Something surprised Mr. David. He had 2 flat tires. He never noticed it when he had come to keep Naomi's uniform. He had just 1 spare tire, so he decided to walk down the road to get help. A few minutes later, Mr. David came back with someone and his tires were changed. It was time for him to travel back to the city, where he had knocked Naomi down to look for her parents. As Mr. David approached the said city, something strange happened. He turned to pick up the uniform, which he had placed perfectly at the back of his car. But to his greatest bewilderment, the uniform wasn't there anymore. Mr. David stepped on his brakes immediately. He decided to clear off the road and search for the uniform. He parked his car and came down. He searched for the uniform, but it was nowhere to be found. Who took Naomi's uniform? Does Tina want Naomi to stay with them? What could be Tina's motives? Find out in the next episode. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, like, comment, and share if you enjoyed this story. Thank you and God bless you.